Up, core reporters? Welcome back to my channel. I was listening to Kailyn Lowry's Coffee Convos podcast this morning, and I found a section of it that was rather interesting, and I figured I'd share it with you guys because I know how much you love these little tidbits and highlights about what goes on her podcast. So Kailyn actually has had quite the history of sharing her fears, anxieties, and perhaps even realizations that some of her kids might favor their fathers more than her at different moments in their lives, right? So I remember last year there was a moment where she was crying, like literally crying on the podcast because Lincoln really very much preferred his dad, Javi. Right. And then as the months kind of progressed, the year progressed, it seemed like things had kind of mellowed out. But in this week's episode of Coffee Convos podcast, she let it slip that at least 2 of her kids have made their choice, or should I say 4 out of 7 kids have made their choices as to where they would like to spend the majority of their time. This was even a storyline in Teen Mom 2 when she was last on that show. I remember there was a time where Isaac, it's not that he preferred to stay with one or the other, but like in certain moments, if something exciting was going on at his mom's house or his dad's house, it would be that way. And during Teen Mom 2, there was a time, and I'm sure you guys will remember. So shout out to you. Make sure to let me know in the comments if you remember this storyline. I'm laughing because it was kind of funny. At first, Isaac would want to stay at Kail's all the time. I think because there were new babies there or something like that. And at the time he was really excited about babies or something was going on there. And Kailyn made it this huge deal. She's like, okay, well, Isaac, he should be able to pick who he wants to be with, full time then, or most of the time, because he is showing a strong preference. And that preference is for me, baby. But then what happened? Later on in that season, Isaac started asking to go to Joe's, if he could spend more time at Joe's. Then what happened? All of a sudden, Kailyn did not feel as though Isaac was at the age where he could make those kinds of decisions for himself, right? So this has been a pattern over the years. Now, I'm going to play it, and I've got the audio right here, and I'll set the scene for you, okay? So Kail's Coffee Convos co-host, Lindsay Chrisley, was sharing a story. She's only got one child. It's a son named Jackson. And they were playing a game together. And one of the questions was which parent do you prefer, basically? And so Lindsay guessed that Jackson preferred his father. And her son's response was rather surprising, pleasantly surprising, I should say. And it led to this discussion. So let's take a listen together.
Me so proud yesterday. Jackson and I were playing trivia with each other. And if you guys have never played this, it's really fun to do it with your kids. You come up with a topic and you try to guess what each other's answers are. And then you write it down so that nobody's cheating, because, there's a lot of cheaters out there. Mm-hmm. And Jackson asked me, who do you think my favorite parent is? And I thought, oh God, I was hoping that this would never come up in life. And I said, Dad. And he said, no. He said it was a trick question. I love you both equally. And it made me so proud to know that we live in 2 different homes. We've been through a lot, but he still loves us different but the same. Mm-hmm. I didn't have that. And if I would have had that, I would have been a lot healthier of an adult.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I go through that with Lincoln and Isaac all the time, right? I know where Isaac wants to be 100% of the time. I know. And I think all of us kind of know. But I told Isaac, I never want to put Isaac in a position where he has to choose. I would never do that to him. And so, and he's told me, I said, you can choose if you want. And he was like, it doesn't matter. I would not want to tell the parent that I don't want to be with. How does that sound? He doesn't want to do that to them. And I feel the same way about Lincoln. A while back, Lincoln asked Javi, when will he get to choose, or how old does he have to be to choose? And Javi said, you're going to stay with both of us until you turn 18. And I think I bawled my eyes out when Javi did that, because I think Lincoln has gone through periods of time where he's closer to Javi, and then most recently he was closer to me. Now I think he's kind of closer to Javi, but I had never appreciated Javi more than in the moment where he kind of had my back there, because I think that if you...
So I do want to stop it there. We will continue to listen to the audio, but did you notice right before I paused, she said that she could have cried. She was crying to thank Javi for having her back. So although she's trying to make it a little bit anonymous as to where Lincoln wants to spend his time and where he wants to live 100% of the time, in saying that she appreciated Javi having her back by saying that no, Lincoln cannot choose. He has to live with both until he's 18. That to me signifies that Lincoln prefers being at Javi's house. If you listen to her podcast regularly, or if you watch my recaps about this regularly, that's not going to surprise you. That's something that we've, kind of always known here. But the other one that's rather interesting is Isaac. I feel as though Kail is very, very strongly hinting at the fact that Isaac might prefer to be at her house, which to me is very interesting, right? Because Isaac does not like kids, and Kail's house is full of kids, right? And on top of that, his house with Joe and V is a lot more calm and stable because Joe and V have been together since he was a baby. Before he could talk, he was in diapers, so it's a very stable, life there. He's got his sister there and everything like that. Whereas his life with Kail has had a bunch of men and women coming in and out of her life romantically and stuff like that. Kids are being born to these random different fathers and stuff like that. So I do find that to be very, very interesting. So these are some of the kind of hypotheses that I have. The first one that I'm thinking is because I know that from what I'm seeing online, I don't follow him, but from what I'm seeing online is that Isaac seems to really be into the whole content creator thing, especially because right now he's doing a lot of content for sign language and stuff like that. And he's been getting some brand deals and whatnot. And obviously Kail is in that world. So I do wonder if that's something that's kind of motivating him to stay with Kail a little bit more, because I feel like she is more supportive of his journey as a content creator, perhaps, than maybe his father. But at the same time, V is at the home with his father, and V is a full-time content creator as well. And I see her being a very supportive, stepmom in that respect. So I am rather curious. And another reason I feel as though Isaac might want to be with Kail full-time right now is because, and I recap this as well, there was another episode of one of these podcasts. Remember, she's got 3, so I can't always remember which podcast she mentioned, X, Y, or Z in. But there was another podcast episode in which she mentioned, and I think this is something that I did exclusively for my channel members. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you can always hit youtube.com/greatsupport/join, or that join button down below if you're on desktop, to get that sort of exclusive content. He had mentioned to Kail, or to Joe, sorry, that he wanted to change his last name to Irwin, which is a last name that no one else in his family has, right? It's Kail's mom's maiden name. And so I think Kail's mom, I don't know what her last name is. I don't even know if she remembers her own last name. Kail doesn't have it. None of the other siblings have it. They all have various last names. And I always found it to be very weird that was even brought up to him as an option or anything like that. I think she said that she told him, imagine that for branding, Isaac Irwin. The kid is in high school. Let's stop with the branding, that this, that, very, very odd. And I know that caused a lot of issues between Kail and Joe at the time. And so I'm kind of wondering, are these little hints that Isaac is leaning more towards Kail right now than he is towards Joe? I don't know, but I felt like the way she worded it is vague. I could be completely wrong. Perhaps Isaac wants to spend more time at Joe's house. I really need you guys' help to decode this, let's read between the lines. Because the first one, when it came with Lincoln, it was very obvious, because why else would you be tearfully thankful that the other parent said, no, you have to live in both, if the case wasn't that the child preferred to live at the other parent's house, right? Whereas with Isaac, her wording to me skewing in the other direction. So she did have an awful lot more to say. So let's continue to listen along, and I will pause when there's another point to be made, because these are not the only kids that she mentioned here. She did also get into her kids that she shares with Chris. So those are Lux and Creed. Creed, she was very vague about it, but I feel okay, at this point, who else would it be? Because she's still with Elijah, right? Let's take a listen.
If you see that your child is closer to one parent over the other, and you are in a good place, you should do everything in your power to make sure that you are facilitating them coming together more. Does that make sense?
As a parent, that even if you are not co-parenting and you are living in the same home with your spouse or significant other, I think it's so important to advocate for your partner or your ex-partner in the bigger picture of things. Like, it's not about right now, it's about what the future is.
Yeah.
And hats off to Javi for that, because that's exactly how I would answer the question as well. And, you know, I might get heat for it for my next statement, but if my child came to me and said, I want to be with you full time and I don't want to go to my dad's, I would say, well, tough shit.
I mean, that's happened. I have 2 kids specifically that have said those words to me. I want to be here full time. And my answer was very different based on the age level for both of them. But most recently, yesterday, Lux cried in front of me and Elijah. He didn't want to go to his dad's. And I said, you know what? I said, but your dad loves you and he wants to see you and you're about to start school. So, like, you have to go to your, like, as much as.
So one thing that I found rather interesting about this podcast episode was that when it came to, like, you know, her thing, right? For example, with Lincoln preferring to be with Javi, she never explicitly said that Lincoln preferred to be with Javi. She only kind of like intimated that. But when she, you know, had this other circumstance in which the child obviously wanted to be with her, she was like, yeah, let me name the child and let me tell, you know, exactly what he said, knowing that this is going to get back to the father. And you guys already know, Chris has been on a rampage against Kail. He has been spilling all of her tea, including her engagement to Elijah. He's continuing doing those like social media live streams about her and everything like that. And I feel like this is going to trigger a huge reaction from him. The fact that she went on her podcast and announced that his son Lux does not want to live with him and that he cried about having his visitation with his dad. Like, oof, that was a major, major, major thing to reveal.
Chris and I, or I mean, even just the general public that knows what they think they know about Chris and I is like, and maybe Chris doesn't even know, but to my son's face, I'm having his back. I don't give a fuck. Like, I might talk shit to Elijah when the kids aren't around, but to my son's face, I'm going to tell him, your dad loves you. You need to go see your dad. You'll get to see your family. You'll get to do, you know what I mean? And I don't love that, but at the end of the day, I'm thinking bigger picture. And Kristen said that was sort of an unrelated conversation, but I was talking to Kristen yesterday on the phone, and she was like, Kail, you're thinking bigger picture, because right now I don't love my kids' dads all the time, right? Like, I don't. But bigger picture is my kids being well-rounded and having fantastic relationships with both of their parents as adults. Because how many times do we see our kids or see people grow up and they don't really have contact with one of their parents because, you know, whatever the circumstances were growing up. If I can prevent that, I want to prevent that. I want them to be close to both sides of the family. I want them to know siblings on both sides of the family. I want them to have, you know, the ability to, like, go to dad's house when they feel like it and go to mom's house when they feel like it and not feel torn and stuck in the middle. Because when you put your child in a position where they feel like they have no choice but to choose, it's fucked up.
Yep. And I wholeheartedly agree.
So there you go, you guys. So she said that there are 2 kids who do not want to live with their father. And so the actual names that she named were not in reference to this, but in the entire story, either way. There was Lincoln, there was Isaac, and there was Lux. Creed was not mentioned, right? So I was thinking, okay, maybe Lux and Creed could be the 2 because they're kind of like a package deal or something like that. I don't know, but it kind of feels like just because Creed was not mentioned at all, I'm going to take him down from that and say that, okay, I feel as though Isaac is the one who wants to stay with her. We know that Lincoln is the one that wants to stay with Javi just based on the way she worded it. And we also know that Lux, because she said Lux was crying at the thought of, going to live with Chris. So those are my guesses, you guys. Isaac and Lux are the ones who want to stay with her full time, and Lincoln is the one who wants to stay with Javi full time. And then Creed, I don't know. He's kind of young to be, really having any strong feelings right now from what I would assume, but perhaps I'm wrong, you guys. This was a lot. I have not seen her spill this kind of tea on her podcast in a very, very, very long time. So excuse me for scalding my tongue on that hot tea. Anyway, guys, let me know what your hypotheses are about this entire situation. I feel like it's a lot to let hang out there on the podcast, but listen, at the end of the day, that's what her podcasts are about, just like sharing what's going on in her day-to-day life, whether it's alongside Lindsay, alongside V, or just by herself on the Barely Famous podcast. Anyway, I'm super duper looking forward to you guys' thoughts about all of this in the comment section down below. And let me know how you think Chris Lopez is going to react to all of this, because it is not going to be pretty. Okay, that's all for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.